right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Mad God, a 30 years in the making stop motion animated feature from director Phil Tippett, who is a visual effects artist on so many classic films from Star Wars to RoboCop to Starship Troopers, Jurassic Park. And this is his like mad work of genius over all these years, something he's been going back to in his little bits of time over these past 30 years putting this thing together, and it is a wild one. And joining me to talk about it is filmmaker and visual artist Bradley Andrew. It's his first time here on the show. We had a great time talking about it, a lot of good puzzle pieces to get into. So that is coming up in a second. Before we do get to it, I want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. And you can, of course, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or on Good Pods or Podchaser or Spotify. There's probably some other places you can rate and review us. And if you've got a little 5-star button you can hit, we would appreciate it if you did that wherever it is you're listening. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show and where I met Bradley. So I love getting new people here on the show, and it's especially awesome when they come from our group. So that does it. Let's talk about Mad God. And if you haven't seen it yet, it is out today on Shudder. All right, so today we are going to talk about this insane movie, Mad God. And joining me to talk about it, we have got filmmaker and visual artist Bradley Andrew joining me today. Bradley, how's it going?
Going great today. How are you doing, David?
I am awesome. I'm looking forward to talking about this movie. This is a weird one. We'll get to it as we're talking, but it's going to be such a weird thing to talk about. What movies influenced a movie by somebody who's so influential, and we're talking about a movie that took him 30 years to make, and it was just clearly his own brainchild. Like, it doesn't really come from anything else. It's kind of a strange one to talk about in our specific format,
Right, and he's such a singular artist. It's like, who could have influenced someone with such a singular vision?
Yeah.
Who predates so much of this landscape of cinema that we exist in right now. So you kind of have to dive into get a little bit more creative with some of your puzzle pieces.
Sure, absolutely. So before we get too deep into Mad God, it is your first time on the podcast. So why don't you tell people a little about what you do?
So basically, I am a filmmaker, film writer, and a comic writer from upstate South Carolina. I work with a production company we started called Refuge Films. We actually just recently finished a feature a couple years ago. It's actually making the festival rounds right now.
Nice.
A good friend of mine, he's like a brother, a creative brother. He actually directed the film. I did editing on the film and some sound work on the film as well. And that's playing, like I said, that's playing the festival circuit right now. It's called The Awakening of Lilith. The best way to describe it, I would say, like a psychological surrealist horror film.
Nice.
I'm also working on a comic, an independently produced comic called Virtual Graveyard. It's a science fiction fantasy horror comic set in the near future. If you're a fan of films like Mad God, you'd probably dig that a lot.
Nice.
So there's some definite influences there and things of that sort, yes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I actually got to admit, I didn't really know Phil Tippett's name, like, going into this. And when I went back and I was like, oh, okay, like, this is everything that's cool when it comes to, like, creature design and, like all these kinds of effects. It's, like, such an influential person. And I think that kind of just speaks to maybe part of why it took him so long to be able to make this thing. I mean, I know I read some of the behind the scenes stuff about how, while working on Jurassic Park, he was like, oh, shit, this is going to kind of be the next, however many years of what effects are. I don't know if people even want this anymore, but eventually it all came back around. And I mean, now I think, do-it-yourself kind of like crazy visual effects artists are kind of something that's sought after in at least in the independent world of cinema.
Absolutely. And he's also one of those names, I found it pretty funny like you said, it's not an instantly recognizable name, but when you look at his list of credits, it's like this guy has influenced me since childhood.
Yeah.
You know, with Star Wars, Jurassic Park, you know, even going into RoboCop, Starship Troopers, you know.
Oh, Starship Troopers, a huge one.
Right, and the journey and evolution of him as an artist whilst working on this feature film of his is just pretty impressive. His resume and just, like I said, all of the films he's worked on, it pretty much informed all of our childhoods.
Yeah, and so in this movie itself, it's out now on Shudder as this is going up, and it was released in little bits and parts, just certain scenes of it as kind of short films over the last few years, and those kind of
Right.
went in the festival circuit. And I don't know, I feel like I saw one of them at one point, or maybe I don't know. I've gone to a lot of these kind of genre festivals over the years with my own music videos and stuff, and I could swear I've seen some of these scenes before, but
Absolutely.
it's hard to tell. Like I said, you know, in that kind of opening, it's like this is so specifically its own thing, and we'll start getting into some puzzle pieces right now. I will say, like, a lot of times when I'm like kind of introducing the show to people, I'm like, we talk about movies through the lens of what other movies might have inspired it, or it at least reminded us of a little bit. And I think this is going
Right.
to lean on that
Good
a little.
companion pieces.
Yeah, it's going to lean on that a little bit. So, yeah, let's get into those pieces. What do you have for your first one?
So my first piece actually goes very well with the way you were describing it. Actually, Mad God was released in 3 parts, I believe, through Kickstarter. It was
Mhm.
a film funded through Kickstarter. So for my first piece, it's going to be "It's Such a Beautiful Day" by Don Hertzfeldt.
Okay. I actually don't know
Oh,
this.
okay, it's an animated film, and it was released in 3 parts as well as 3 shorts. They were eventually combined to make an entire feature.
Mm.
I think you would really dig Don Hertzfeldt's style. It's an animated film, and most of his films they're drawn in a style that is reminiscent of stick figures.
Okay.
But the best way I could describe his work would be absurdist, surrealist, that type of thing. It's almost like if Charlie Kaufman did an animated film.
Right. Yeah.
And just the way he released it in the 3 parts was very reminiscent of Mad God, how it was done, the sense of humor, you know, the psychological dark elements to it as well. It's a very beautiful poetic film, and it does combine bits of live action, but it's mostly animated, and it's just an existential surrealist comedy. It's just all these different elements that I feel like Phil Tippett really evolved Mad God over the years. You know, you have so many different genre elements in there, but you
Mm.
have all of these different psychological and just these different elements to the film. And It's Such a Beautiful Day, I really feel like captures that same spirit. I'm not sure how long it took Don Hertzfeldt to complete the film, but I know it was released in 2012 as a feature, and
Mm.
there were 3 shorts that he collected over to combine into It's Such a Beautiful Day. But I highly recommend his work. If you're a fan of animation, if you're a fan of surrealism, absurdism, you would definitely, I think, appreciate his work, and you could see how it would fall in a line with someone like Phil Tippett and Mad God. Has the
Yeah.
same type of energy.
Absolutely. I just brought it up actually while you were talking, and I've totally seen one of these shorts before. I'm not sure which
Right.
ones. I've never seen the full feature. But yeah, that was such a cool way of doing animation and of like kind of mixing those styles together into something that's like totally unique. I also think like I'm going to bring up video games later at some point in this conversation, and I feel like that's been a big influence, that style of It's Such a Beautiful Day, on a lot of these like new kind of indie video games, which I don't know if
Absolutely.
much of a gamer you are, but yeah, I mean, a lot of these side scrollers, they use that kind of like really cool, like you get the old school video game gameplay, but with like these kinds of unique visual styles in every one of these kind of games. And it's kind of my thing. Like I don't like first person shooters, but I like these kind of games, you know?
It's also interesting in the respect that the games you're talking about, they're most of the time they're throwback games. They're
Mm-hmm.
in a retro style, which is sort of what Mad God feels like at this point, even though he's been working on it for 30 years. To see a film that is so practical with puppets and just, you know, the stop motion technique that he uses, it feels like such a throwback, even though he's been working on it for such a long period of time.
Yeah.
Seeing something like that now, it just, you know, it's so tangible and everything feels so real, even though it's so fantastical. So it does feel, I do get what you mean in that sense because it's such a beautiful day by Don Hertzfeldt also feels like that, and the simplistic animation style. There's something about that simplicity with things being practical that almost feels so retro now, but it's all technology, it's all techniques, it's how you apply those techniques to the story you're creating. And yeah, I really feel like it's such a beautiful day. It would be a great companion piece. It is a bit lighter than Mad God. God does
Yeah.
feel, it's pretty intense. So this is a bit lighter, but it carries some pretty heavy themes with it. So I would definitely recommend that as my first piece for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'll go on to my first puzzle piece, which is kind of going to be a bunch of a director's films. It's those Ron Frick documentaries like Baraka and Samsara,
Yes,
all those kinds of things. This is just a more messed up version, basically. But
right.
yeah, you're just getting this incredibly detailed look into this world that you don't necessarily get to fully understand, but you get to at least see something that you never would have seen elsewhere. And those documentaries always like create such a visual experience where you might leave questioning like, what exactly am I supposed to take away from this? And that's not the point. It's totally an experiential kind of thing, and just seeing something that you'll never see anywhere else. And he has really created that kind of world, even though this is stop motion and obviously just from his imagination. You're getting such a detailed world. You're seeing so many parts of that world, so many of the kind of characters that inhabit that world and the places and the things that go on in it. And yeah, it creates such a really cool experience.
Yeah, and there's the worlds he creates in Mad God feel so lived in and so fully realized, even though it is stop motion. When you're in that type of experience with the films you're talking about, they're so immersive with the landscapes and everything that I mean, he really does suck you into this world, and it feels so lived in because it is. He's been working on it for so long,
Yeah.
it's so tactile, and it just feels like you're not sure if it's Earth. I think it's pretty vague on the locations, but it's just the fantastical sets and everything they built for this film. It's like otherworldly, and some of those documentaries that you mentioned, some of the shots in those are just so otherworldly. You can't even believe that some of those places exist.
Right, right. It's like this is the real world. Like it sure looks like it, but I don't know that I'd ever see that if I
Right. It
was to
feels like
venture
some
out.
futurist vision of an alternate reality or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go on to your next piece.
Okay. So my next piece is actually in reference to a group of filmmakers. There's two sets, and they are mostly known for working in stop motion animation with some live action. But the Quay brothers, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them.
Not by name.
Christopher Nolan actually did a documentary on them a few years ago. They're two brothers who they do very similar. If you looked up some of their stop motion, they're very surrealist, pretty much like Mad God, very Terry Gilliam esque.
Mm,
Another one, Jan Vigmeijer. He's a Czech surrealist as well, who
mm,
works mostly in animation, some live action. He actually did a live action. It combines live action and animation version of Alice in Wonderland, I believe in the '60s.
okay.
It's just titled Alice. You've probably seen frames from it
Yeah.
and shots and everything from it, but it's in that similar vein of as Mad God, just with the execution, the animation styles, and just the whole weirdness of it all. But the
Yeah.
Quay brothers and they're almost they come from that same school as Jan Zinkemajer, but he's a Czech animator. But their collective work, all three of those filmmakers, they all are great companion pieces together, and I think they would make a great introductory to something like Mad God for someone who isn't ready to just jump into experimental animation. Something like Mad God, this would be a good starter, basically a good appetizer for Mad God. If you can
Mm,
handle these three filmmakers, and they release a lot of shorts and features in there as well. So if you can handle the collective work of these filmmakers, I would highly recommend Mad God to someone that can sit through these filmmakers'
yeah.
films. They're
Nice.
just on that same level of weirdness.
Yeah, for sure. And I really need to discover more of that stuff because, we talked about The House earlier this year, the Netflix stop
Hmm.
motion animated film. And yeah, I love this stuff and I just haven't discovered enough of it. And I need to. I'm going to use your puzzle piece as a jumping off point to go to another one on my list, which is kind of the opposite end of the stop motion spectrum. And that is the films of Henry Selick, the Coraline
Ah,
and the Nightmare Before Christmas and all that kind
absolutely.
of stuff. Obviously a little less weird, maybe a lot
Hmm.
less weird, but certainly a proof that this kind of thing can go over and that there is an audience out there for, this kind of movie to really be received well by,
Absolutely.
especially horror fans, but, really
Right.
just any kind of audience that maybe, we talked earlier about how Phil Tippett was, unsure if, the world of stop motion was really wanted anymore in the age of CG, but just to show that there are people out there who are still into these things and do want to see these kinds of movies. And so, even if it's a little more mainstream, Henry Selick's films do show that there are people out there that want this stuff.
Absolutely. And I actually had Tim Burton on my list. I think
Mhm.
he's worth mentioning, not as an influence on Tippett, but just for bringing stop motion into the mainstream,
Yeah.
especially when I was a kid growing up in the early to late 90s, early 2000s. Tim Burton was the first person you saw who brought that type of animation to the mainstream and, tried to bring it back, but wasn't always successful with that. He people like Ray Harryhausen, who I also have on my list.
Sure.
Tim Burton is the type of guy who introduces you to those old masters, maybe that you
Yeah.
haven't heard of. You've maybe seen the films on television when you were younger, but he was the first person who introduced me to all of these great actors, these great character actors, and people like Harryhausen and all the pioneers of animation, specifically stop motion. So I do think, along with Henry Selick, Tim Burton is a name that's worth mentioning, alongside Ray Harryhausen, who influenced him. I
Yeah.
think, Phil Tippett, I think some of that juice he got was from seeing films. Maybe I can, finish Mad God. There's these stop motion films that come along every now and then in the underground, but you also have people like Tim Burton, whether you like him or not. You have to respect the fact that he loves stop motion and he pursues that as much as possible, even in films. Like some of his early films that weren't fully stop motion. He always had stop motion scenes in those, and just always brought that to the consciousness of the viewer. He always highlighted stop motion in all of his early films. So I think that's
Yeah.
something that's sorely missing from a lot of mainstream films today, to
Yeah.
incorporate that type of thing. Like I said, Tim Burton, he's just a name that I felt I had to mention, just because for my own personal journey, someone who loves animation, someone who loves stop motion, I don't feel I would have that love as deep and the knowledge that I do without Tim Burton. So,
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, like I'm not sure how old you are, but like generally our age range, I think we were introduced by Tim Burton into all this kind of stuff.
absolutely.
I'm pretty sure he was kind of the main entry point. And then
Right.
yeah, Ray Harryhausen's also on my list as well. I mean, you got to think if somebody is going to dedicate so many years of their life to making this kind of thing, they probably love all of the stop motion stuff that came before. And I mean,
Absolutely.
who's better than Ray Harryhausen? So I think definitely has to be on the list here. I'll throw another one in too. Somebody else who has kind of kept the stop motion world alive over the last couple of decades, and that's the band Tool and their music videos by Adam
Absolutely.
Jones. And those are really creepy, just fucked up, nightmarish visions, just created that really fit the music, first of all, which the music in this film is also awesome, as well as the visuals. But, you know, again, create like a kind of world that you just simply cannot see in any other kind of medium. And things that you can kind of piece together ideas of what the story is and like what exactly is being said here, but at the same time it's very much open to interpretation, and there are so many things you could kind of take away from it, or you could just kind of let it wash over you and just be like, this is just super cool.
Yes, absolutely. I actually have the Tool music videos from Adam Jones on my list as well. It's
Nice.
one of the first things I actually thought of as I saw when I first saw images from the film. It was one of the first things I thought of, being such a big Tool fan for a long time. So that is definitely right up my alley, and definitely something I had thought of. So
Yeah.
that's right on.
Well, let's go to another piece. What else do you got?
So the next film I have on here is a film I've never seen. I'd never heard of until recently. I was listening to a interview and it came up, and it's a film from 2004 called Strings. It's a Danish film. Like I said, I've never seen the film, but the thematics of the film actually sound very similar. They kind of conjure the title Mad God in your head.
Hmm.
It's the film is actually, I was reading about it, and it uses all marionette puppets.
Mm.
And
Talk about creepy.
right, yeah, and it's one of those films that doesn't shy away from showing the strings, hence the title. So
Mm,
it has a lot to do with that perspective of the artist. I feel like someone who pulls the strings, as
sure.
Mad God suggests. Is Mad God Phil Tippett? He likes to say no, but I mean, I do feel like this film. I can't speak to strings, but I feel like this film, in relation to just the impression I get from that film, yeah, this film is a lot about the artistic experience, the journey that an artist goes on to create a work, whether it
Mm,
be over a long period of time, short period of time, the struggles that go with that. I don't know if you really listen to many interviews with Phil Tippett, but he describes, having mental breakdowns while making this film,
I'm
just
sure.
going through life. I can only imagine maintaining a professional life in the studio and working on this film that took so long. And most of the people that worked on the film were actually volunteers. So just that whole. He talks a lot about the unconscious artist, and creating. A lot of this work comes from the unconscious mind. So I think
Mm,
that applies to a lot of animation, especially marionettes, and it just ties nicely into the thematics of those type of films and just that art form in general. So I
yeah.
thought that was a good piece. Like I said, I never heard of the film. I've never seen the film. I did some little bit of research on the film, and it was just so interesting. It doesn't look like it's widely available anywhere streaming.
Mm.
It is a Danish film. I'm hoping to find a copy of it. I really want to check it out. It looks very interesting. Actually, James McAvoy is listed in the cast. I was like, how have I never heard of this?
Yeah, right. I brought it up as well, and yeah, it looks really cool. I'm like the visual style of it and everything. I definitely want to check it out.
Yeah, the synopsis is definitely like something you can't do justice. It's like, I feel like it's a film you need to see. And like I said, from what I gathered from the synopsis, it ties directly into the title Mad God. I feel like it ties to that title,
Yeah,
Mad God.
absolutely. And I love that, by the way, about the that particular interpretation of this, just the creative process, and just how insane the creator is to have to put themselves through all this, and what's unfolding on screen probably having a lot to do with that. I'll go to another piece though, and it's probably a lot more commonly seen piece. That would be the Alien series. I'll go with basically all of them, though, like everything from the original Ridley Scott Alien, with that just bleak world, the insane creature design, the Geiger-inspired, creature design, something that's going to kill you at any turn, which in this movie, Mad God, everything is basically out to kill you in numerous ways, in this just complete hellscape. Then to, Aliens, with things getting just a little bit more over the top and crazy, back to even bleaker with Alien 3, weirder creature design with Resurrection, and then back to the bleakness and the prequels, the Ridley Scott prequels, which I do love. So yeah, I mean, this is a very bleak movie. The landscape that we're seeing shown through this stop motion world, everything is just death at every corner. Everything is just violence. The world has just been overtaken by just nothing but violence and awfulness, and it's wild.
Absolutely, and I actually had Giger on my list, independent of the Alien films, just
Sure.
as a visual artist. I had a couple of painters on there as well, just as a collective piece. I heard him talk about Hieronymus Bosch a lot. Phil
Hmm.
Tippett, being inspired by him. And I also picked up some visual inspiration maybe from William Blake and Francis Bacon. And all four of these painters, they all have very distinctive styles, but all of their work has this very apocalyptic feel to it, which I feel like Mad God definitely has.
Hmm.
So I really felt actually, not a lot of cinematic parallels or influences, but more from literature and painting, especially. I
Yeah.
think Phil Tippett, I'm not sure if he's someone that watches a lot of contemporary films, but he definitely seems like someone who does look at a lot of visual art and is influenced by visual art more so than maybe lots of contemporary cinema. I think he's someone who looks back on classic literature and classic art, and he draws a lot of influence from that. So I wanted to definitely mention those guys, and you bringing up Giger through Alien,
Yeah.
like, wow, yeah, I definitely had him on my list, but I didn't think about Alien specifically. But that's interesting, especially with all the creature effects and everything. That
Yeah.
definitely is something I could see.
Yeah. Like I said, just things that want to kill you everywhere.
Right.
But so cool. I'll go to another piece then, since you brought all those painters in there. I mentioned I'd bring up video games. There's really a lot of video games we could talk about here, but though I decided to just kind of pare it down to one. And I don't know if you're familiar with these, but the Oddworld video games.
Yes, I do
Yeah.
remember those.
The total like kind of steampunk visuals, these underground
Yes.
hellscape kind of locations, weird monsters. I think it's the closest thing. While we could easily make an entire list of just games alone that I think feel like the world that Mad God has created, I think that's the closest one that we would get.
Absolutely, and it definitely captures that eccentric, nightmarish quality that Mad God has. Those games, I do remember. I think I only played the first game. I think it was back in the late '90s on the
Yeah, I
original
think
PlayStation.
97 on
Right.
PlayStation. There was just one last year though on PlayStation
Oh
5.
wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I heard a little bit about that, but yeah, haven't kept up with the series, but I definitely do. It did make an impression on me as a young gamer, so I definitely do remember that world it created, and yeah, I can definitely see that.
Nice. Well, what do you got next?
So, for my next piece, I went with the ultimate midnight movie, and that is 1977, David Lynch, Eraserhead.
Yeah, on my list too.
The reason I went with it, outside of some of the interesting creature effects, is just the concept of cosmic horror, which I feel like Mad God really dips into in a certain sense.
Mhm.
There's so much going on there. There's so many things you can read into the film, but I definitely feel like it has that scope of cosmic horror, and just like I said with the creature effects and Eraserhead. And one other thing too about Eraserhead, it's not a silent film, but the majority of the film plays like a silent film
Mhm.
outside of the music. I feel like Mad God does as well. It's
Yeah.
almost nearly a silent film, so I feel like those parallels definitely. And I feel like Phil Tippett is definitely someone that would appreciate someone like David Lynch. They're both such artist-driven filmmakers, so I feel like that would be like a pretty good piece, because they're both such singular visions that could only come from the filmmakers behind them. There's no one else that can make those films. So, not sure what you had to say on Eraserhead.
I would just add there's a creepy, messed up alien baby thing at
Yeah,
one point.
yeah,
So I mean, there you go
yeah.
too. So
That's absolutely what initiated the piece. But when you start thinking on it,
yeah,
that
there's
cosmic
plenty more.
horror. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, for certain, the creature effects there, questionable creature effects from Eraserhead. But that was my next piece.
Yeah, for sure.
And I feel like this is a potential, not potential, it's a definite midnight movie for the years to come. So
Oh
it'll
yeah.
fit in there perfectly with something like Eraserhead, which is one of those films you can just throw on after hours and you just let it play in the background.
Yeah, I'm so happy that a company like Shudder is putting this thing out, but at the same time, I would love to see this with a crowd, like a midnight movie screening. That would be so
Oh
damn
yeah, it would
cool.
play so well.
Yeah. So I only have one more piece, and it's, I'm sure, real hardcore genre, film fans would just be like, what are you talking about? But I got to go with James Cameron's Avatar.
Oh
you know,
wow,
I mean,
interesting.
it's a work of pure ridiculous vision that, like, no matter what is necessary to make it happen, he's going to make it happen. We're now at the eve of finally seeing a second one after 10 years, and there's 5 of them plans. And, James Cameron was like, look, this is what I want to make. I do not care. I have a vision for what this thing is going to be. If it takes decades, that's fine. I need the technology. I need every last resource. It's got to be the exact vision. And so I'm just trying to think of just unparalleled vision, and that's what I usually attach to Avatar. Like, it's not 100% a successful movie. Like, it was great in the theater. It didn't quite work as well when you go to revisit it back at home, but you can't deny that he set out to make something and put every last resource into it.
Yeah, absolutely. He has a vision just like Phil Tippett, and it's an uncompromising vision. It's a vision he put so much time into to develop the technology, to realize his vision. I feel like Phil Tippett did the same in a way by sticking it, with it for so long over such a period of time. Even though he didn't work on it consistently for those 30 years, there's dedication to that. And, say what you will about James Cameron, but the man definitely has a dedication when it comes to films, the films he makes, and he certainly has a passion. You can't take that away from him.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see like a behind the scenes thing to see just how like the technology is being used in Mad God changed from things that were being worked on in the 90s versus the early 2000s versus maybe the last 5 years of finishing it up. Like, what tools were available to him that weren't in the beginning? I'm sure it was just such a process of changing technologies.
Yeah, and it really reflects in the film, I feel like, the evolution of technology through the years. It's actually pretty impressive that, the film, it's a very nonlinear film, but the film has any coherence at all. And I heard him talk a little bit about the transition from film to digital. I'm not sure how he adapted to that, but I did hear him talk a little bit about the challenges of going from film to digital, and I'm sure that shooting on digital or doing some of it in digital definitely opened up a lot of tools, especially in stop motion, that allowed him to do a lot more. So
to finally finish it,
right? To finally finish it, yes.
Yeah. So, do you have any more pieces you wanted to bring up?
I have a few more. They're more jokey pieces, I would say.
Sure.
One of the pieces is solely based on the appearance of the assassin, and when I saw the appearance, it made me think of the Richard Stanley film Hardware. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Sure, yeah.
From 1990, there's a character at the very beginning of the film who the outfit just completely, it's, very surface level. It just reminded me of that. When you look up the film, it's pretty much any frame you see is that character is dressed in the same get up almost entirely. So it just flashed into my brain.
That's a good one.
That appearance of that character, and then brought him up earlier. I know you're a huge fan just from listening to the show, Charlie Kaufman, but I was briefly reminded of the character in Ant-Kind, the filmmaker, who was working on his stop motion film for, I believe it was like 90 years.
I can't believe I didn't think of that. Yeah.
Like I said, it was just a jokey piece. I thought that would be kind of funny to mention that because I thought that kind of perfectly paralleled Mr. Tippett's journey, and
that's hilarious.
Kaufman also always has a lot of he uses puppetry a lot as a thematic device, so I thought that you could use being John Malkovich, Anomalisa, you could use any of those to address that. But I thought that would be a funny piece. A little bit of a deep cut if people haven't read Ant-Kind, but they should definitely get on that. And just a recommendation to anyone that's seen this who may notice a cameo from a director. I'm not sure if you picked up on that.
I did not, no.
I actually did a little bit of reading and discovered that Alex Cox has a cameo in the film. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Alex Cox.
That name sounds really familiar.
I would say his most well-known film. He's an underground type of filmmaker. I believe he did the film Repo Man. That's probably his most well-known film.
There you go. We just covered it actually just a couple seasons ago. Wow. over on Awesome Movie Year. So yeah, that's where I know the name from. Yep.
And the title I was going to recommend, I figured I would recommend one of his films. Strictly for the title, I thought it applied to. Mad God is Straight to Hell.
Nice.
Which is this, it's, it basically defies genre. It's action, comedy, everything, but just that title, because I feel like Phil Tippett sent us straight to hell with this film, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
So I
I
thought,
wonder how that cameo came to be. That's another story we gotta look into at some
right, I
point.
think it has something. I think he actually his studio, Tippett Studios, helped Alex Cock on some of his films, maybe with some visual effects, and maybe
Mm,
that came through as a bit of a favor. But I just thought that was an interesting
yeah,
tidbit that he had a cameo in the film, and he's one of those cult filmmakers as well. Fits right in with a film like this. One of those people that he pops up and stuff, and it's just like a big deal, like
sure.
just a cult filmmaker popping up in another cult filmmaker's film. So I thought
Just
that was
that mutual
cool.
respect. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Well, right on. I'm going to go ahead and read down the list of everything we just talked about, and then we'll get to some closing thoughts. But we talked about It's Such a Beautiful Day, Baraka and Samsara, and other Ron Frick documentaries, the work of the Quay brothers and other surrealist stop motion animated directors. We then went to Henry Selick stuff and Tim Burton, Ray Harryhausen, Tool music videos, the film Strings, the Alien series, and then that led to H.R. Geiger and Hieronymus Bosch and William Blake, a bunch of artists. Also, the Oddworld video games, Eraserhead, Avatar, Hardware, Antkind, great puzzle piece there, and a bunch of other Charlie Kaufman as well. And then we talked about Straight to Hell. Are there any other things you wanted to bring up before we wrap this thing up?
I really think that's pretty much it. Just if you don't know much about Phil Tippett, if anyone sees the trailer for this film and is interested in the film, interested in Phil Tippett, I would say just go and do a bunch of research, watch a bunch of interviews with him. His career is absolutely fascinating. Just the evolution of his career up until Mad God, and just I really appreciate his vision and his artistic outlook on life. Just massive inspiration, massive, you know, I really love, even with filmmakers when their films don't work 100% of the time, I would rather see an artist attempt something I've never seen
Right.
or just try things, and I feel like he really achieved something with this film. I feel like it really paid off for him, and I'm very excited to see what he does next. I've heard him talk about possibly doing a sequel to this, not on the same scale, but hopefully we'll see some more actual feature work from him as a director and a filmmaker, because I think he's just such an unique and interesting artist, and just his perspective, and he's been working in the film business for so long. He's one of those crossovers between generations, and I just really appreciate his perspective and just his artistic vision.
No, great, great point. And like, I mentioned earlier about, The House on Netflix earlier this year. I mean, I think
Mm,
these are good reminders that there are so much weird, cool stuff out there that is worth really
absolutely.
discovering. So yeah, absolutely. I think that does it for Mad God. Is there another movie you watched recently you want to recommend?
Actually, I do. And it's actually on Shudder, which I thought would be a nice tie-in since we're going to be Mad God, picked up by Shudder. And it's called Lake Mungo. It's from 2008, I believe, around that time period. And it is the best way to describe it would be it's a found footage horror film. The best way I sell it to people is if David Lynch did Twin Peaks Firewalk with me using found footage. I
Okay.
don't really want to say too much about the film. It's definitely one of my favorite horror films of this century. It's just an excellent film. It's very effective. It's a slow burn, but I believe it's on Shudder now, and it's definitely worth recommending for people who love artistic type horror films, and just it's one of the best of that genre, I would say, for sure. The
Mm.
found footage horror film, and I recently rewatched it, and just I remembered why I don't revisit it often. It's a very effective film, so I would definitely recommend checking that out for people who are fans of horror.
Okay. That's a good sell right there. I've heard great things about it. I've never seen it, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
now that it's on
excellent.
Shudder, I'm gonna have to check that out. So awesome, Bradley. This was great. Why don't you tell people again where they can find you and your work?
Well, I'm on all social media. You can find me on Facebook. I'm actually in the Popcorn Puzzle Pieces group, so you can find me there. I'm usually in there every now and then. You'll see me pop up in there, so you can find me through my Facebook. All my social media links for Instagram, Twitter, Letterbox. I'm on Letterbox as well. Is there. So you can feel free to add me, talk about movies. I'm always happy to talk about movies with people. So, and you will be able to find all my work. I share everything about my comic and the films and the production company I'm associated with. So if you just add me on there and follow the links, you'll be able to see everything on there. I pretty much post any updates on all of my social media. So that's probably the best way.
Awesome. Well, hey, I'm so happy to finally get you on the show, and I look forward to getting you back again sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great.
We are like the Maury Povich of podcasts. People come to this show because it's a train wreck.
I'm giving this podcast 3 stars. The host keeps yelling at me.
The people have clearly spoken. Check out Whatever with Jason Soto on Anchor, Apple, Google, wherever you get awesome podcasts, or you can go to the home location at rabbitholepodcast.com.
Second thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about urination. I want to talk about peeing specifically.
See what happens when Jason throws out the segments. This is what we get instead.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Mad God. Thank you to Bradley for being on the episode. We've got Bradley coming back to talk about Alex Garland's Men very soon. And you can find that conversation already on our Produced by David Rosen Patreon, which, by the way, Bradley, thank you so much for being our 10th subscriber over there. As we continue getting more subscribers on the Patreon, we're going to make more and more content for it. We, of course, have advanced and bonus episodes from Piecing It Together, as well as bonus content from Awesome Movie Year and bonus content from my music career. And by the time this goes up, I will have already finished the new feature film that I am scoring. So I will finally be back to work on both my next album and on putting together a new compilation album that I'm planning on posting exclusively on the Patreon. So lots of cool stuff hitting that Patreon soon, as well as the Uncharted episode, which I don't know when the hell I'm ever going to get to finish posting it on the regular Piecing It Together feed. It's just going to live on Patreon forever, possibly. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you to everybody who has subscribed over there. And you can check it out, patreon.com/bydavidrosen. We would love to have you join. And, well, that starts at $1 or $3 for the bonus content and goes up from there. For totally free, you can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and get a whole bunch of stuff that way. Also, our Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group, which I mentioned at the top of the show, is where I met Bradley and invited him to be on the show. I would love to have you in that group. Check it out. It's a closed group, so we can keep out all the trolls and weirdos, but you can check it out. It's facebook.com/groups/piecingpod. It's the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces Facebook group. Lots of great movie conversations are being had in there every day, and we would love for you to join. And it's up to me to accept you into the group. That way we keep all those weirdos out. So, yeah, you know. Anyway, if you enjoy what we do here on the show, make sure you're subscribed, rate and review, share it, all that stuff. We really appreciate you being out there listening. And time to wrap this thing up with a piece of music. And it was only a few months ago when we covered another stop-motion animated film called The House on Netflix. And when we did, I talked about a song I made called Back Into the Dark, which was on my album Head Like Fire, and that has a really cool stop-motion animated music video created by a visual artist named Bea Landers. And I'm going to do that again because, you know, when something is as perfect of a combination as a stop-motion animated David Rosen music video and Mad God, the stop-motion animated film that are both really dark and weird and fucked up, it's kind of perfect. I got to play it again. So I'm going to play Back Into the Dark again as the closing song for today's episode. You should go check out that music video. It's on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/music by David Rosen. You can also check out my music website. It's bydavidrosen.com. Lots of great music on there and all my music videos and a whole bunch more. So, you know, you can check that out too if you're looking for something to do. But yeah, let's play it. Back Into the Dark. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.